Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Discentered Podcast. Today we are interviewing Rabble, aka Evan Henshaw Plath. He is the founder of Nos.Social, and he also worked previously on Planetary, and he was also the first hire for Odeo back in the early days when Twitter was forming. Thank you so much for joining us, Evan.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed We Distribute and the podcast and everything you guys are doing to cover the space.
It's definitely a challenge, and thank you for that. Just as a disclaimer, we are currently part of Nos.Social's Journalism Accelerator program. They're not paying us or anything, and that's totally okay, but it's mostly they are helping to foster community interactions in their space that are not solely about Bitcoin. And I think, Rabble, your sort of motivation behind that is largely fostered by wanting to see a diversity of content from people that would benefit from Nostr that are not necessarily native Nostr people that have been there forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm very curious about just kind of the story of Nostr and how you guys approached it. I know that for a while, Planetary was built on Secure Scuttlebutt. I know that it had some of its own challenges and issues, and I'd just kind of love to hear about, how did this all start?
Yeah, for me, it started much earlier than that. It started with working on originally social media for activists.
Mhm.
I ran a platform in the 1990s called Protest.net, and then built something called Indie Media, which was a way of people back in from 1999 to 2005 or so was when its height. We set up websites for different groups, activists all over the world. We were the first people to live stream a protest from the streets in Seattle in 1999. We allowed publishing of web videos, streaming, pirate TV, pirate radio. It was pre-social media. And so I had been doing that and trying to figure out how do we democratize the media more. And that's when I got involved with Ed Williams and Noah Glass and the crew at Odeo, where we were trying to make podcasting more accessible. Take it from the initial hacker community to, and as part of the activist stuff that we were doing, we had been playing with SMS and phone networks. And
Yeah.
so in 2004, before Odeo was founded, we built this thing called Text Mob, which was a text alert system that you could do during protests. And we used it at the Republican National Convention, Democratic National Convention. And we had thousands of people using it and hundreds of thousands of messages delivered. But it was a proto Twitter, and it was clunky. We used all sorts of hacks to deliver the messages and whatnot. But it did let you get an ambient sense of what was going on in those protests. So fast forward, we do Odeo, we build this podcasting thing, we get a bunch of venture capital funding, and we go and we launch it, and Apple integrates podcasting into iTunes and the iPod, and basically they're the 500-pound gorilla, vertical stack integration. And so the company says, well, what do we do now? And that's when we did the hackathons, to what led to Twitter. And so we looked at text mob, we looked at blogging, we looked at feed reading, we looked at old Unix systems with the poke and finger commands, where you could sort of get status updates. And we started building hackathons around that. And so that's where a whole bunch of different projects, including things that look like Vine and TikTok, and things that look like, video sharing and audio sharing, things that look like AirChat, we built back in 2006.
Wow.
And we built a visual voicemail system. We built a whole bunch of prototypes of stuff. And a couple of them, the video one and the text message status update, those were interesting enough. And so the people most passionate about the hackathon projects, which in this case was Noah, Jack, and Florian Weber, who's one of the core Rails developers, they kept working on it. And initially it was a side project, and we didn't want anyone to know about it, but it took off. And it took off because it was a playful space, and it was created by a bunch of people who was blogging, and it was open by default. It wasn't open source, but the APIs were open. And so eventually over time, Odeo was dropped off. I made the brilliant decision to go off and work with Katarina Fake over at the Flickr team at
Mhm.
Yahoo Brickhouse because I thought Yahoo was doing interesting things with Web 2.0. I was obviously mistaken. Um, just goes to show that, like, not only do the people who first joined Twitter said, "Oh, this is a really stupid idea," those of us who built it and created it also said this is a really stupid idea.
And yet, it became one of the most popular networks.
It it took off. Like, it built through blogging, through different communities of people. They got to use it. It got easier, and the company did an amazing job of being open. There was an open door policy. People would just walk in the front door. And sometimes it would be a homeless person, and sometimes it would be a programmer who wrote code on our applications. And like it was a very amorphous, open culture and company. And that process led to the adoption of at replies and hashtags and retweets and inline images and inline video and short links and Bitly is a comes out of that.
Yep.
All this stuff gets created by third-party developers. Everybody feels a part of it and super excited. The thing I'd left when I first went to Yahoo is I worked on Yahoo Pipes. Do you remember Yahoo Pipes?
Yeah, yeah. Yahoo Pipes was sick.
Yahoo Pipes was like, how do we let's visually reconnect all the pieces of the internet so we can make new applications. It was amazing.
Yeah, it
Um,
was revolutionary.
and like that was the thing that drew me away from working on Twitter because I was like, oh, this is really cool. But eventually, Twitter needed a business model. Eventually, it kept growing and becoming a bigger and bigger thing. Eventually, trust and safety issues became a problem. Eventually, what happened was they needed a business model and they didn't have one. And they were worried about protecting their space and protecting the valuable thing, having taken a bunch of venture capital money. And so this is when Bill Gross, Jeff Jarvis, and a group of people come in with this new company called Uber Media, and they were going to take over Twitter. But they weren't going to buy the company. They were going to buy all the Twitter apps and like cross post to Uber Media and like save Twitter because Twitter wasn't doing a good job. Like it was like a hostile takeover meets we're going to save these clowns from
Themselves.
themselves. And Twitter panicked. They shut down the open API ecosystem. They didn't tell anyone. They cut off API keys on OAuth. We built OAuth to protect users.
Yep.
Because they were putting their passwords in apps. And
Yep.
the reality is that OAuth led to the biggest centralization of power in social media of any one technology.
Oh, God.
Because instead of users deciding which apps they're going to use to connect to which APIs, now platforms got to decide which apps they approved.
Yep.
That teeny little shift of token-based authentication completely flipped the power dynamic. So when Twitter lied to all the community and shut down this open API key system, a whole group of people are like, oh, it isn't ours. Turns out we do need this open source stuff that we've been talking about. We do need these open standards and open protocols, and we can't just rely on the company doing the right thing.
No.
That's where the Fediverse comes from. That's where Christine Weber, Evan Ferdromo, and a whole bunch of other people get together and they make the first activity streams that becomes ActivityPub, which becomes the standards, which gives us Mastodon. It all comes from that first moment in 2011, 2012, when Twitter encloses its commons.
Yep.
And we start going, oh, do we need an alternative that we can control? Do we need an alternative that we can survive on? And there was a bunch of interesting stuff there. And, you've got RSS, which is podcasting, but also early Twitter. And then you've got Atom, which is RSS, but not broken. And then you've got activity streams. And then you've got ActivityPub. There's and Twitter was part of that. And Twitter killed the feed reader by making it social to decide what you're going to read.
Yep.
Now, the Fediverse stayed sort of small and weird for a long time.
Yeah.
And only got really a little bit less weird when Yugen comes along and builds Mastodon on top of Ruby on Rails.
Yep.
The same thing that Twitter had been built on top of. it's not that hard because like we built Twitter in a day. Like we stood up at 9 a.m. and said, we should build this thing. And like at 6 p.m., we had a demo of the first version of Twitter.
Wild.
Which is why people think it's simple. Eventually it grows, it scales, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So we have Mastodon, which starts taking off.
Mhm.
And then we have people looking at it and starting to say, is this the right way to go? And you get this guy, Dominic Tarr, who is this off the grid solar punk node developer who's released 450 NPM libraries and lives on a sailboat off the coast of New Zealand. And
Wow.
Dominic is like, I want to use Mastodon. Like, I want to use these open things, but I live on a sailboat, which means my internet connection is shitty. So I need a system that works offline.
SSB.
That's Secure Scuttlebutt. Originally, it was just Scuttlebutt, and then he's like, oh my God, this isn't secure, so I'm going to make a new version called Secure Scuttlebutt.
Yep.
And Secure Scuttlebutt takes some ideas from the crypto world. Like, it takes some ideas from the blockchain world. It's not a cryptocurrency, it's not a blockchain project, but it incorporates some of the tech and some of the ideas of this, like, linked list of signed data. And essentially, each user in Secure Scuttlebutt has their own personalized permissioned blockchain.
Yep.
And then it has a gossip protocol so that each time two people connect, they can share messages back and forth.
Yep.
And, you know, Dominic's idea is you got two people on sailboats who literally like run into each other and like their phones and their laptops trade messages. And it's like a very like doesn't require the whole internet and everything else. And it's super neat. And that's what I started developing the Planetary app on. I'm like, this is a neat protocol, but we need it to be easy to use.
Yeah.
But it made some assumptions about the trade-off between network bandwidth and user cases and processor time checking the encryption and the signatures of all these things.
Yeah.
And so Secure Scuttlebutt is super efficient at syncing and really, really slow at validating that you've synced the right thing.
Yep.
And
yeah,
it needed the whole history and like it didn't use any servers at all. And so there's lots of interesting ideas and a lot of super interesting hackers, the same folks who were doing the early Twitter stuff and Fediverse stuff, start playing with Scuttlebutt. And it never takes off.
No. There were some serious bottlenecks with SSB. Like, the user experience is similar enough to what a lot of people are used to with social networks, but, you know, at the same time, one of the limitations I found was that you can't have, or it's generally not advised that you have a phone on Secure Scuttlebutt and a desktop client because you're not really sharing an identity between those two things.
You couldn't. If you wrote one to the other because they had a signed log and there was no syncing between them, like you could fork your own identity really easily. And because every message needed to have the signature of all previous messages, you couldn't delete.
Yeah.
So Scuttlebutt never takes off, but it's hugely influential. It's like the Old Testament of social media protocols.
Yeah.
Because with the exception of ActivityPub, which predates it, all of the others that we're considering are based on concepts from Secure Scuttlebutt.
Yes.
Paul Frazee was one of the major Secure Scuttlebutt developers. He's the architect of AppProto and Blue Sky. Jay Graber is the CEO of Blue Sky, was also a Scuttlebutt developer. Dan Romero, who created Farcaster, was heavily influenced by Secure Scuttlebutt and talks about it. And Fiat Joff, who created Noster, is heavily influenced by Secure Scuttlebutt. Everybody looks at Scuttlebutt. And the Lens folks too, the Project Liberty DSNP folks, everybody that we're talking about today is heavily influenced in design by the idea that you have this JSON structure of events, you have signatures of it, you have keys that are the identity, you can link out to DIDs and have verification, everything else, but like, and that you have some sort of gossip protocol. And initially Scuttlebutt was all peer-to-peer, but then it had these things called pubs, which are just relay servers. And so the PDSs the relay servers that exist in Blue Sky, that's the pubs from Scuttlebutt. The
Yep.
relay servers in Nostra are that. The hosts, the relay hosts in Farkas, they're all Scuttlebutt.
Roughly about the same concept.
And so what happened to me was we'd been working on Scuttlebutt and very frustrated at the multi-device issue, very frustrated at the syncing issue and the validation issue, very frustrated the inability to deletes, and we didn't see good reason why those limitations were in place.
Yep.
Like, Scuttlebutt was meant to be in a very low bandwidth, high processor experience. And the world we live in today is high bandwidth, low processor speeds because we're on phones.
Yep.
So I spent a bunch of time researching every decentralized social media protocol I could find. And I found about 90.
Yep.
And
That sounds about right.
I haven't updated it in the last year, but I keep an Airtable of them, of like, what is this project? What's, what are the kind of tech? What's the philosophy behind it? Downloaded, trying out. And that's how I found Noster. And I'm like, oh, Noster is like Scuttlebutt fixed.
Yeah.
But instead of having these off the grid solar punk users as its initial user community, it's Bitcoiners. And I'm not a Bitcoiner. I mean, I know how Bitcoin works.
Sure.
I've set up wallets and things like that, but I am not a believer in the way that so many people are.
Yeah.
And so I had been involved with Blue Sky from the very beginning. From like before it was announced, I knew that like Jack and Perg were going to look at something, and I was working with Jay and Golda Velez and the other folks on that initial document. Jay really stepped up, and she wrote the analysis of all the existing social media protocols, and that's what got her the job running Blue Sky, was that she did a year of work really researching this stuff and really digging into it. And at one point, Blue Sky was going to be built on the Matrix protocol.
That's crazy.
Because you could sort of see how you could do it, sort of.
Sure.
Like, and there's prototypes you can find of Matrix, Blue Sky using the Matrix protocol on GitHub.
Well, Matrix even has like their own example of like, here's how to build a social network on Matrix with Cerulean. So like the concept is out there and it does exist, but whether or not it's the right tool for the job is kind of a matter for debate.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's the right tool for the job. I think
No.
Matrix is meant to replace XMPP in a chat protocol. Overloading it wouldn't make sense. Although, did you know that the original Twitter API
Was XMPP? Yep.
And at one point in 2008, Twitter was federated.
Yep. Yeah. Blaine Cook, I think.
And Twitter using XMPP. And so you can go back and you can find a talk that Callan Elliott McRae, who's now SVB at Adobe or something. But anyway, we gave a talk at OSCON on how to build, decentralized social media APIs with XMPP as opposed to REST. And Roy Felding, who wrote, conceived of REST and wrote his paper on it and created the concept of the term, basically got up in the talk and told us that we were stupid and that our system wouldn't scale and that REST would do just fine. And Brad Fitz, who had created LiveJournal, was in the room, and then he took up that challenge and built PubSub Hubbub and built the Google PubSub infrastructure. And basically, this was 2007, that talk, basically created the tech that made ActivityPub and everything else work.
Yeah, for people that don't know, PubSub Hubbub was a core piece of OStatus, which was the early protocol that StatusNet and the Fediverse used in 2009, 2010. And a lot of OStatus's concepts were basically adopted by ActivityPub. Not all of them, but a lot of them, if you look and compare the two, they're very similar.
And so, fascinatingly, the concept for an API around this to federate it
Mhm.
originally was supposed to be a Twitter thing, and then it fell apart because we tried to do it on XMPP, which was a bad choice.
Yeah.
And we didn't believe that the webhooks and the other model would work. That inspired people to do it. It then got incorporated in O status, which then became part of ActivityPub, which is how we have the Fediverse. So
Yep.
the these all weave back and forth. But to get back into Noster, basically I looked at it and I said, there's many things which are the same between Lens and Farcaster and Noster and a bunch of others that you haven't heard of. Like
Mhm.
there's one which is like, halfway between Noster and ActivityPub, and there's which I don't even remember the name of, and Willow and PETA Panda, and there's tons of these things that no one
Yeah.
ever used but are super interesting technically.
It's
And
always interesting to see which ones take off and which ones don't, given that there are so many independent efforts. And I think that's a characteristic of decentralization, is that a lot of decentralization itself is decentralized. So, like, you get a couple of protocols that get really big, but you said you had a list of like maybe 90 of them.
yep,
And so you have a lot of offshoots that maybe are great research projects, but don't necessarily go anywhere.
and these things take off because of the people, because
Yep.
it's social. Like it's in the name, but we forget it. We, as technologists, we tend to think that the reason these things are taking off is because of the technology or the design or the affordances or these kind of things, and that is often not the case.
Yeah.
Um, so what I saw was Blue Sky does lots of things interesting, but had chosen a organizational model, maybe for good reason. Like Paul played with all the open source scuttlebutt stuff. He played with DAT and Hypercore and like all these open protocols. And what
Yeah.
Paul decided was, I don't want to design the protocol in the open.
Yeah.
I want to give people the protocol designed, and I want a vetted group of people to come in a smaller concentrated group, and we're going to design the protocol, and anyone can use it.
It's funny because, we listened to your interview with David King,
Yep.
and, I think you and I both came to pretty similar conclusions about which models, which protocols adopted, and I think it's interesting that Blue Sky is very much a cathedral-style development, where a lot of it is internal and a lot of it is from a very studied, scholarly perspective, whereas Noster is literally, a bunch of random people coming up with ideas and throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And both of them are valid for different reasons, but it's interesting to see Noster develops at a much faster clip on certain things because people are willing to experiment and do crazy stuff and see what works unilaterally for all of them. Whereas Blue Sky, I think, has to take more time figuring out the different pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So Blue Sky does some of their stuff better. The initial user experience and the social graph experience, and the fact that they provided servers that scale, and like Blue Skies and Noster both have composable moderation. Like they
Yep.
on like there are labeling engines on both of them. There are content warnings. There are reports. There are takedowns. Functionally, they work the same,
Yeah.
except that the Blue Sky one has a core labeling engine that you can't opt out of,
Right.
and the Noster one you can run the entire network without any moderation labeling engine whatsoever.
Right.
And so that also reflects the sort of philosophies of the two protocols, which is like Nostr is
Top
more
down.
permissionless. Like
Yep. It's bottom up.
it's bottom up. There's all sorts of things being tried, which is super chaotic and hard to understand. There's no one app in Nostr that
Mhm.
has more than a third of the users. Whereas the Blue Sky official app has like 99% of the Blue Sky users.
Yes. Yeah. Blue Sky is kind of at a weird place, given that they developed a lot of really good and very interesting back-end technology, some of which is still above my pay grade in terms of comprehending it, but also, like, their focus on making the UX easy, that philosophy kind of boils down to they basically abstract everything away from the user, so it's practically invisible and in the background. And, from a Nostr perspective, you can play with every single piece if you really want to. So to see that kind of difference, I mean, it's a trade-off. Do you want it to be easy or do you want full control? And I don't think we've really bridged that gap quite as well as we would hope to.
Yeah. So, for example, you can, you know, in Noster, you want to set up a username so you're not using a key. You have to pick
Mhm.
which services. Or Nos.Social, my app, like we integrate a service that you can do it that's more like Blue Sky. But many people have to go figure it out, or they have to know how to do it. You guys self-host your own identity verification on
Yep.
Nostr, which is great. You also do it with Blue Sky because Blue Sky lets you
Yep.
do it as well. Um,
But
and
it takes some know-how. You have to
yeah,
figure
it's
out how to
super
do it
tricky.
yourself.
And, a lot of what we're doing is trying to make that more accessible. In Nostr, by default, you've got this key pair, and there's like half a dozen ways you can log into apps using your public private keys. There is a way with, Nostr login that lets you do the Blue Sky way, where your key is stored on a server, you get a username and password, and it all works. But you can
Yeah.
also use a browser extension like MetaMask
Yep.
to log in. Or you can, for native apps, you can put it in the Apple keychain. Like, Noster's like, here's all the ways you can log in, which is fun from a developer's perspective and confusing for users. It's
Yeah, it's the
similar
same
to
thing as
the
it is the
Fediverse
same
model
thing
of like
it
pick
is
a
the same
service.
thing as going to a restaurant and seeing a menu with 300 items on it and saying, "Great, now I don't know what to eat."
Exactly. I'm a vegetarian, and so when I go into a vegetarian restaurant, I'm like, oh my god, now I have to pick, because most times
Yeah.
there's like 3 items, and you're like, okay, well, okay, I
Yeah.
pick one of the 2 or 3 or one vegetarian option, and then you go into a place that has dozens or hundreds of options, and you've got choice fatigue.
Yeah, it's too much. And, from a software perspective, you do want to give users that ability to make choices for themselves. I don't want to just say more is better because that kind of oversimplifies things, but at the same time, um, limiting people's ability to choose various things in their experience and the stack and how things work. On the one hand, you can make opinionated decisions from a protocol standpoint. On the other hand, limiting people's ability to do things in a way that doesn't make sense to them can really kill the experience for a lot of people.
I think the trick is we need to have a combination of apps that provide really good user experience to people signing up. And so, like,
Yeah.
Mastodon does a pretty good job if you're on a server that makes sense.
Yes.
And if you end up in like one of the big servers that makes sense and you have someone bringing along and say, joining this, and here's a community, it gives you the local feed, which is, if you're joining a topic community, makes sense. There's apps that's relatively easy to log into. You have this like weird username thing with 2 apps, which is a little odd, but they do a pretty good job. Blue Sky does a pretty good job of like logging in for your stuff. And what we're
Yep.
trying to do with Nostr with Nos.Social is that same thing, where we try and make it that easy thing, but you control your keys. Like, you can take your account and run it in all these other weird apps. And
Yep.
if you don't like our moderation bots that we build in, use a different app, or mute our moderation layer altogether if you want to operate
Yep.
without it. Or, there's a guy who makes this app, Coracle.social.
Yep.
And Coracle's a great app. And
It
John, who
is.
makes it, is a devout evangelical Christian. And
Mhm.
so his moderation bots and moderation tools that you can follow and engage with follow family friendly Christian values.
Sure.
And that's great, because then you can decide, do you want everything like the OnlyFans models, and like, do you want all of the like Bitcoin content? Do you want none of that? Do you want just Christian family values content? That's kind of what we want.
Yeah.
Um, and, um, but figuring out how to make it all work is quite tricky. And figuring out the intersections between these different networks is also fascinating, because
Yeah.
Nostr is part of the Fediverse.
It is. Whether people want to admit that or not, there is an intersection right now between Blue Sky and ActivityPub and Noster. And granted, it's all bridged and there's some wonkiness, as Ryan Barrett told us in our interview with him. No two services are quite exactly the same. There is some approximation and mapping that has to be done between each service. So, of course, you're going to get a little bit of context collapse and a little bit of functionality that doesn't quite fit. If your status is too long on the Fediverse, it shows up on Blue Sky as truncated with a link. Um, but it, nevertheless, like we've had a couple situations already where, like, for example, the Donald Trump coverage of the court case that had a popular post that came from Mastodon, was bridged to Noster, and then it got popular on Blue Sky, which even like a year or two ago was unthinkable. Those are different networks. How did you do that?
Yep.
So we are getting to a place where the lines are getting a lot blurrier. And that is both exciting, and I think it also brings up a lot of new challenges and like, okay, now we're part of this sort of tied together thing. How do we move forward?
I think what
And we've
this
got
does is
Damon.
yeah, but
um to touch where you were kind of going, Rabble. I think you talked about bridging the gap, right? I think what's important is the what are the philosophies of the users? What's the philosophies of the creators behind the protocols and the all of the technologies, right? Because it's going to be varied. I've seen people get upset with you on Noster over
oh
your
yeah,
wanting to provide a safer space, right?
yeah.
And that was interesting to find out about the Coracle dev. I had no idea that he was a devout Christian. But and so outsiders, they have this perspective that Nostr is just nothing but Bitcoiners, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's why, from the uh, Fediverse perspective, they want nothing to do with Nostr, right? They think it's nothing but scam artists, and then you have them not wanting to do anything with the Blue Sky slash AT Proto group, even though it's funny to me because they're actually a lot similar than not, just a younger demographic. But that's a conversation for another day. But because it's Jack Dorsey, he sold us out. It's more butthurt, right, than actually any true rooted philosophical differences, right? But to your point of bridging the gaps, I think that's an aspect that needs to be taken into strong consideration because to have that balance, right? It's like walking amongst the earth. It's like how do we meet people with different cultures, different languages, different parts of the world, and we figure out a way to coexist, right? And so how do we then take those same real world experiences and then apply it to these protocols and not platforms, right? And so I think you're absolutely right. Like bridging the gap is the perfect phrase to use.
It's also really, really funny in the sense that as we've continued to do coverage of all these different networks and protocols and spaces, and we're doing news coverage of their developments, people really like to be on a team and people like to be cheerleaders for that team and say,
And
our
they
team
say
is
they're
absolute
great.
best. They're all great and they all have really interesting ideas. And I think I'm actually going to be pushing out a piece soon about a comparison between these three systems. And I think we each bring something valuable to the table that the other two could learn from. But it's so funny to see people on Mastodon say, "Oh, I would never use Blue Sky. That's Jack Dorsey's network." And then you go and correct them. They're like, "Okay, well, I'm still not going to use it." And then you explain Noster, and they say the same things. Or you go to Blue Sky. We had an article about title embracing the Noster protocol.
Yeah.
Blue Sky people were like, "Whoa, that's hysterical!" And Mastodon people said nothing, and Nostr people were like, "Hell yeah, I can't wait to do this. I'm switching from Spotify right now." So you have these differing opinions, and I think getting past, for lack of a better word, the groupthink or the tribalism of being in one community and realizing that at the end of the day, we're all humans and we're all trying to work on different aspects of a big problem. We can work together to build really incredible things if we let our biases uh, go away. If we challenge our biases and interrogate what we can actually do for each other.
And we're all way more similar to each other than the alternatives. Like,
Yeah.
we're all actually on the same side. We're all on team open. And the funny thing about people blaming Jack,
Yeah.
the reality is you can't touch a project in this space without hitting a Twitter alone.
Yep.
Like, Ev Williams funded Maven, which was just in the news causing problems and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yep.
Biz Stone is on the board of the Mastodon
Yep.
Foundation. Jack caused Blue Sky to exist, got its initial funding, and now is funding Noster, like,
Through OpenSats. Yep.
through OpenSats. And like, you can't, we're all over the place. And
Yeah.
so, like, yes, you can be pissed at Twitter. You can be pissed at the founding team of Twitter. You can be twisted everything Twitter did and everything else. But you also have to acknowledge that, like, the Instagram guys, they're not working on this stuff. They're not building open source stuff. They're not building these
No.
open protocols. They're not building these projects. We are better off that a whole bunch of the initial Twitter team are still going around investing in supporting all these projects, and they're open source. Like, one of the critical things is we're making up for the mistake that Twitter wasn't open sourced.
Yeah.
The stupid
Yeah. It's
thing
about
was,
15 years of technical debt.
yeah. So I've always felt that there's a huge amount of fight between the early adopters and the user communities,
Yeah.
but with a few exceptions, the people working on the protocols and working on developing the apps are really friendly because we're all working together.
Yeah.
And we are actually converging. We're going towards, there's a level of convergence. If you look at what Jay says about Blue Sky, the things she says they're doing are the things that we talk about wanting to do in Noster. And
Yep.
the things she says she wants to do in the future are the things that Noster already does.
Yep.
Like, they have a really great app store of algorithms, and they make it really easy to build your own algorithms. Noster has this thing called DVM, and it sort of makes it work, but the Noster one has the marketplace payment stuff figured out, which Blue Sky doesn't have figured out, but Jay's like, we need to figure this part out too. Or you go to the guy who runs Black Sky. It's super
Rudy.
important. He's amazing, but like, there's no easy way to pay him.
No.
And
yeah,
like, I don't use Noster because if it has micropayments, I didn't love them and everything else, but it does solve a problem. Like, it has these Zap Lightning payments and stuff. And so we haven't built it into our own app because it's not a priority. And in some ways, we're positioning ourselves as like the non-Bitcoiner Noster folks.
Yep.
But easy payments, easy micropayments between users and from users to services gives us an economic model that's not advertising. Like, you can do paid subscription content on Noster, and it's open, and users control that audience and stuff like that. It's a little clunky, but
yeah, it's a challenge for us too in the Fediverse. The Fediverse, I think, has it worse in some ways, in the sense that you have people running servers that potentially have thousands and thousands of users, and regardless of your perspective on that part of it, they're running it for free for years and years on end. Like, a lot of people, they'll start an instance and say, oh, I'm just going to have a little interest-based club. It'll be great. Then 4 years later, they've got 10,000 users and a substantial server cost they have to pay month over month. And usually they're only making
work and
yeah, they're doing all this free labor to prop up the network and make it a safer space. And I think those are good things on their own, but they're doing it for free. And past a certain point, it's not sustainable. We're all kind of in this weird place where a lot of the creators in the Fediverse, a lot of the people hosting infrastructure, a lot of the people writing software and building projects are all basically sharing pennies from each other's wallets because, like, we don't really have a way to pay each other or support each other. And some people think that, like, maybe bringing in a Patreon style project might help, like if we had that as part of our infrastructure, but really we lack a monetization layer completely, and it really hurts us.
And because of people's biases and things like that, and all of these ideas of factions and everything else, like, it's hard to see how the Fediverse would be able to adopt a fiat system of sending money
Yeah,
between various different things.
it would be messy. Like, everybody would have to have, like, a Stripe or a PayPal account, and there'd have to be some kind of back-end payment processor thing. It would be hard.
And at the same time, a crypto thing would work, but there's
People don't wanna
ideological
touch it.
problems to it,
Yep,
which
I
some of
get
which
it.
are justified. But
Yeah, but it's definitely a hard problem, and there are some good ideas. One of the older ideas that, the Funk Whale developer put out a long time ago was, this idea of making discovery of people's donation sites and links more discoverable in their social profiles. That was called Retribute,
mhm.
but, like, it never went anywhere. And unfortunately, you need someone with, like, protocol level expertise to build that kind of thing, and then you have to slowly wait for all the different bespoke Fediverse platforms to adopt it. I think one of the biggest mistakes we made in the Fediverse was we basically adopted the federated part of ActivityPub, but not the client part. And so every single thing that could have been a client is now a full blown server. And now we have to all manually do our development to stay on the same page.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm not building directly on the ActivityPub part of the Fediverse, is
Yeah.
because, and it's why I'm not building on top of Blue Sky as well. Like, part of the reason I chose Nostr was that I have full access to the stack, and because users are in control of their data
Mhm.
and accounts, and they're separate from the apps they use, there's less needing to negotiate permission from all of these stakeholders. And so
Yeah.
to get something done, like, I feel like this is the biggest problem in the Fediverse, is that you have a bunch of overworked volunteers
Underpaid. Yep.
running instances, and they're just keeping the servers up and dealing with their defederation requests and moderation requests and everything else. And so they're they're the ones that have to choose to adopt the new technology. They have to choose to upgrade to the new versions and things like that. So it's very hard to build on top of the Fediverse as it exists now. It's easy to build
Yeah.
part of the Fediverse, but you can't build a layer on top of it. And so with Nostr, you see all these apps on built on top of it. But there's others that even do a more interesting job of that, which
Yeah.
people don't talk about, like Farcaster, who they have this micro app framework called Frames, where
Mhm.
you have specific message types, and you could say this message type is dealt with this micro app on this server, and then it returns HTML
Hmm.
and you can interact with it. So you
Oh,
can, it's amazing actually. And it's the thing that caused Farcaster to take off. We should steal it, because
interesting.
everybody should copy
Yeah.
it, because Frames is amazing and there's no reason that you need all of the other Farcaster infrastructure to work. And basically it's like this permissioned little micro app that takes the content from the message, information about who the user is, sends it off to a
And
server. That server does stuff, sends back JavaScript that manipulates it directly in the browser.
yeah,
And then you can do things with it, interactivity, send out things. And then to write new messages, it then gets approval from the parent container.
it sounds like a decentralized sandboxed, OEmbed provider
Yes,
almost.
but it's all interactive. Like, you
Yeah,
can embed code in there. It's amazing. Like, so, but
yeah, this
they
is
they
this
make
is exactly
building
the
those micro
headache.
apps so easy, and the rest of us don't even know about it.
Yeah, this is literally the first time I'm hearing about this, and on the one
That's why
hand,
they just got a boatload of money.
yeah,
Yes,
but,
that was it.
people look at that and say, "Oh, it's because it's blockchain. Oh, it's because it's Ethereum," and it's like, yeah, that might be part of it, but there's other parts that are important too that are just getting swept under the rug.
Their user graph was like this, and they added frames, and it went like that.
Jeez.
And yes, they've got cryptocurrency. They've got a few other things which are interesting, like you can run a private channel, and if you're the admin, people can join, but they need to stake a little bit of money. And then if you violate the rules, you give up that money, and that money then goes to the moderators of the channel, which is pretty neat too.
That's wild.
Getting the tokens and the money around and making it's a pain in the ass, like
Yeah,
all the problems of
100%.
crypto. But like, they have the ability inside their commons to pay for people doing social labor.
Yep.
And run micro apps and then pay for the micro apps and stuff like that. So like Farcaster isn't just like, it's interesting they raised so much money. It's going to have a huge effect on the overall space. I'm not
Sure.
thrilled about that, but there's a bunch of interesting stuff going on there that the rest of us should be looking at.
Yeah. And it
And
doesn't necessarily even have to be the Ethereum part or the blockchain part. It's these other things like frames that it's like, if you applied that to any of the three spaces that we've talked about already, they would probably benefit from it.
yeah, like imagine inside your master, like your Mastodon's social and you have this thing and like, you know, it's an interactive little game that's like Snake Game or something, but you're playing it with everybody else who's viewing that same instance of the frame. And so like I could post something like, let's do a Snake Game. And then everybody who sees my post is in the same little game. Like,
That's the thing is you look at this technology and you think, oh my God, the future looks so bright. There's so much great stuff. And then you look at what you currently have and it's like, how do we get there?
I mean, that's my life. Like I spend, we have all these things that we want to do with NOS and everything else. And you know what we spend our time doing? Looking at analytics for onboarding flows of users and figuring out where people are lost and figuring out
That's
why
every
people don't come
startup.
back and how they discover it and everything else. You know, the experiment I
Yeah.
want to do is experiments beyond the chronological, like the linear timeline. Like
Yeah.
Twitter, like the chronological feed existed before Twitter, but Twitter made it a big deal. Facebook
Yep.
adopts it from Twitter. Instagram adopts it from Twitter. I mean, hell, Kevin Systrom, who created Instagram, was at Twitter. He was our intern.
Yep.
So, but today we have all these debates about what the order of the messages are. What if we didn't have that sequential timeline? What if we had a locally running LLM on device that looked
Mm,
at all the messages you're seeing and all the interactions and gave you a newsletter? Because
okay. So
newsletters are
Maven.
amazing. Like we have them all over
Yeah.
the place. Every open source community has a newsletter with like, so and so is working on this project and so is working on that project. And there was discussion about this thing and they're all links. Like Debian does it. Every big open source project does it. What if
Yep.
there was a personal one that was generated by your locally running LLM for you?
It's it's not a terrible idea. Um, I think like given yesterday's Maven story, and I saw your comment in response to that article, uh, certain parts of the network are very, very much allergic to even touching the concept of LLMs.
I
And
know.
yet, at the same time, like we have the possibility to have on-device LLMs that don't send it into the cloud, don't violate anybody's privacy, and generate stuff for you using the power of your phone. So it's not like it's a completely out of left field possibility.
We could run it on the phone. You could also run Mixtral and Mistral on or Llama LLM on the
Mhm.
Mastodon servers or the other Fediverse servers. So it's just
Right.
using local data, it doesn't send it off. Like, especially when it's constrained of here's all the content, make sense of it, and
Yep.
provide like it doesn't need the biggest language model to do that.
No, actually, like they're pretty compact nowadays, and I've seen a number of iPhone apps come out, even Fediverse ones now. Damon can speak to this a little better, where they have LLMs built in that can help you summarize like all the conversations happening in a thread.
There's
You
too
just
many. We
tap a
need
button.
that.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
that's actually
yeah,
useful for a 300 comment thread. I'm not going to read every comment unless I'm really, really interested in it.
yeah. That actually was an idea that I had got. Uh, so there was this like late last year. There was this project called like Project Norwal or something. And I forget what his first name is, but the last name is Thompson. I think he owns like one of the bigger publications, but he was part of that project. And what they essentially were doing, like once the craze of LLM started to come, they were like, and then also collided with Elon and the whole Twitter situation, and so we're like, hey, why not just ride both of these waves, right? And so they had this project where it was sort of like Reddit, but it was only done by like the users, and so it was They're there to facilitate conversations, right?
Yeah.
And they would have this one where the LLM generated the first topic, and then it will be followed by everybody else. And then what you could do is you could provide your feedback, and there was like certain labels that you could select, right? So you could put like, oh, we're talking about LLM and decentralized social network platforms, right? And it would say, and then Sean could go and comment, and he could mark Rabble's post as thought provoking, right? And or I could put my thoughts about Sean's thoughts is a question mark, right? And so what would happen is the LLM would then take all these considerations in and then say, this is the topic by Rabble. Sean Tilley said, LLM suck. The Fediverse hates it. And this is what the LLM would do. It would go ahead and refresh on its own, right?
Yeah.
And so they ended up changing that project, and like they kind of I think it's like Switch Easy now, like they sell software for enterprise. And so anyways, I got the idea from them. We were going on a project. There's this Mastodon client, and he was running like a local ML model. And I said, hey, like, why don't you give this a shot? I got part of this project early on, and so it ended up working out because again, you could have this full thread with like 60 people, and you don't want to scroll. At least I don't want to scroll to each comment, and so you could have the language model then, you know, give you the
Parse it.
gist of parse it, tell you who each is like any um provocative thoughts or anything that
Yep.
that might work from the people that commented. And so yeah, you can do that. Like we've been testing the small language model 5.3, and it works fine. Not great, but 2 weeks ago we had a breakthrough where we ran the Llama 3 7B model, and it was like incredible, right? Like it was the processing was really negligible. Like you couldn't even tell that we weren't running, cloud compute, right? Like that's how fast like we were getting the results from running locally with the Llama 3. And so yeah, you're absolutely right that it could be done. I don't think that using it on a server would be great, nor would I think it would get any kind of goodwill.
Yep.
But yeah, running it locally via like a client, like what we've done and what we've tested, yeah, it's absolutely doable. I do want to kind of shift this a little bit because I think you were touching on some very interesting points, and Jack did too a couple weeks ago at the conference about like a marketplace um, of algorithms and feeds, and I think this is a beautiful concept, right? Because
Yep.
we can imagine this blank canvas and going into a service, and why should it not be specialized, right? Like you should be able to go in and select from a market of feeds across your interests, right? And then you can utilize a local language model, which then gives you your own fully custom feed, right? So even if you, Sean, and I selected some of the same algorithms from the same marketplace, but our feeds would look different, right? Like based on what the language model determined. Like maybe I interact with something a little bit more, or you a little bit less. But I think creating these avenues in terms of truly having these blank canvases where people could truly dictate what their particular experience
Absolutely.
is the way to go, right? And the same thing with the composable moderation. I think there's a few ways to address it a little bit differently, but I think that also is a market that can be had.
When I look at all the AI stuff and the complaints about algorithms, it's not that AI in most of the cases is a problem or the algorithms are a problem. It's the capitalism that's the problem.
Yep.
That about what kind of corporations have what kind of power and what kind of control. It's, Cory Doctorow's choke point capitalism stuff, where it's like the problem is the scale and structure of the power dynamics around it. If you know, if a group of artists could get together and put their art into a large language model and then be able to create new things, that is a tool that they get that supports them. If they have an economic model that supports them as artists, then they can give back to the commons. But if
Yep.
instead we create in the commons and we're not supported, and then a few corporations come in and take it and then use it to destroy our livelihoods, that's where it's
That's
a problem.
horrible.
Yeah. And so, like, it's about how this stuff gets used, who gets used, and it shouldn't just be like AI bad, but
Yeah.
like who's using it, why? Because like there's a like Damon, it's like you said, there's like a ton of super interesting ways in which we can do this that leave users in control. You know, one of the fascinating things about Nostr and some of the other platforms is like Edward Snowden is a big Nostr fan
Yep.
because he can use it entirely over Tor. There are Nostr relays on Tor. Tor's built into some of the Nostr clients. So his connections stay on the Tor network and never leave the Tor network and participate in Nostr. So he has actual really good privacy. And you have end-to-end encrypted private messages on Nostr that really work. And we have end-to-end encrypted private groups that scale.
Yep. Yep.
I am super excited what Evan Prodromo is doing this summer about trying to get the MLS stuff and get private groups into the Fediverse and make it work. But and he's super smart and it's great, but it's even when it gets developed, it's still going to be a slow process if the rollout has to happen instance by instance of Fediverse server admins.
Not to
And
mention platform by platform.
platform by platform, and and then the Fediverse is rife with a whole bunch of politics. Like Alex Gleason is this like choosing to be this bad boy that pisses everyone off because he went and worked on Truth Social, and
And Gab
yeah, and Gab, and like he like
and Spinster
and
and a
in
lot of
no
places.
way am I defending him and his
No.
politics, but he's got this neat thing called Ditto now, which is built on Soapbox, which is both an open source Fediverse instance and a Nostr instance that like
Yeah.
really nicely in a Fediverse compatible way sits at the intersection between the two. And it's really cool.
Yeah. I actually took a look at it the other day and ran it on my local machine because I'm like, all right, I'm not a fan of the dude, but like I want to see how this is put together and what problems he's trying to solve, even if I disagree with 99% of his politics. And honestly, Ditto's really clever. It's just a Nostr relay that has a UI bolted on top of it, Soapbox, and it just has a little bit of a layer for a Mastodon compatible API. And I think it addresses some usability/security problems that maybe Nostr currently has, where
Absolutely.
a lot of people are just jamming their private keys into random apps. And granted, the authorization authentication thing is getting a little bit better. I know that like you can do it from clients on Android and you can do it with your wallets now and stuff. But like honestly, circumventing that and just using Fediverse Masto API apps with a a Nostr server is brilliant.
Yeah.
It's honestly a legitimately creative idea. And it's kind of funny and kind of sad because our instance runs on a fork of Pleroma, and it runs on a fork of Soapbox. And it's like using it, I'm like, wow, this looks so much like our instance. And then I'm like, yeah, but if we put it on our server as is, people would think that we're endorsing him.
And it,
And we're not.
and he it's frustrating. Like, and I'm not saying people should endorse him. Like, I don't endorse his politics. Like, fuck the Nazis.
No.
And fuck the people who like in the name of free speech are empowering them. But
Yeah.
like his other project, Letterbox, is basically complaining somehow that Substack isn't free speech enough.
That's crazy.
I'm like, really? That's what you're gonna go spend your time working on? Um,
Okay. Have fun. But
um,
yeah, Ditto itself is a pretty awesome project and it has legitimately good ideas. It's just that, unfortunately, it is developed by someone that is very unpopular in parts of the Fediverse, a large part of the Fediverse that has, queer and black and brown and trans people that have been affected by the instances that he has helped prop up.
Sure. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's tricky. That's tricky because, in the Fediverse, adopting technologies can be seen as an endorsement when it's really much less political and much more technical. So that's a hard thing to navigate. Hopefully, we'll see other efforts similar to Ditto in the future. Um, and yeah, it's a legitimately cool project.
Yeah, and and like the hate speech is real. Like empowering that stuff is real. Like I work on Noster and I get homophobic comments all the time as a queer person
Yeah,
building it. Like it's weird because my people are off on Blue Sky and the Fediverse and everything else. But there's like two things that I the reason I chose that and the reason I think that
yeah,
there's something there. One is like the tech does the things we want to do.
yeah.
And it's got the ability to do real end-to-end privacy and real encryption, private groups and private messages that can really hide your privacy. And so you're not relying on the server admins or someone else. The
And it's very peer to peer, and it works.
Yeah, which which is hard to make it work. The other thing
Yeah,
is I am firmly of the belief, and this is, I have been to lots of Antifa rallies. I've been lots of Black Lives Matter rallies. I got tear gassed 100 times in a row in Portland during 2020 in the Black Lives Matter protests. Like I've been targeted by Trump supporters. I've been doxxed by Trump supporters on stuff. But I really believe that if we build a system that is easy to deplatform people, then in the end, the people who support the existing system and support the institutions of power and support the economic institutions and the cultural institutions that are trying to prevent us from having change, they're going to win in a system that deplatforms people. Like,
because it can keep doing it.
yeah, they can keep doing it. And they've got the institutions of the market and the state and all the other organizations to do it. And so we on the left, we who are trying to build a broad movement for a radically different society, we need to build tools that let us defend ourselves. And so
Yep.
I built a system that, yep, I cannot kick some of those alt-right folks off of Nostr,
No.
but I can build tools into our apps and our servers and our systems and our protocol that let communities of people protect themselves.
Yeah. It's an interesting contrast too, because I think we're seeing across the Fediverse, across Blue Sky, and across Nostr different approaches to trust and safety. I think you probably know about IFTAS a little
Yep,
bit. They're
I'm a
kind of
member of IFTAS. Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they're kind of I wouldn't call them centralized, but they're the closest thing to a central organization within a decentralized space for figuring out, okay, we're going to build a layer for synchronizing block lists to servers. We're going to build a layer for scanning images that can detect CSAM hashes. We're going to build a layer that people can apply tags on top of existing federated content. Doesn't attach to the content, it just matches up by an ID or something. Like there are ways that we can make that a lot more feasible. And then on Noster's side, with Nos.Social, you are basically building bots that do very similar things. They add
And
tags
the
and
plan is to
layers.
add IFTAS support. Like the plan is
Yeah,
to look at IFTAS content that comes through the gateway and like add those content warnings and labels and let people filter on it. And you know the
they're
funny
doing
thing is,
similar things on Blue Sky.
Noster has this massive free speech thing, but we run all of our media through the same CSAM filters that everyone else
Yeah,
does. It's not like, we still exist on app stores. There's still requirements that like Apple and Google and everything else. And yes, in Nostr, you can use this thing called Blossom, which is a
yeah.
self-hosted media thing. And technically there's even an extension that like encrypts the media and puts it encrypted on the server and then gives the keys to everyone. So the server doesn't know what media they're hosting. Our media
Mm,
servers don't accept that because that seems like an
yeah,
insane idea,
that's a can of
but,
worms.
but people can do it. But most people are actually operating in mostly the same way across all these platforms.
Yeah,
And mostly we're, despite cultural differences and community differences and tribes and everything else, we're mostly searching for different ways to solve the same problems.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like collaboration in that sense is something that's very much needed. You know, regardless of whether it's a federated space or a purely peer to peer space or whatever the heck you could classify Blue Sky is, uh, they're all trying to figure out one of the hardest problems in building online communities is how do we give people just enough tools that are relatively easy to use so that they can filter out the shit that they don't want to see, they can block people that are harassing and trolling them, and they can, you know, curate their own experience online and see what they do want to see. You know, one of the biggest things about the First Amendment is like, yeah, free speech is great, but so is free association. And part of free association is the ability to say, I'm not going to associate with that.
And that's the
Yeah,
one fight
that's
that I've had in Noster is like coming up to people who are like, "You're controlling our speech." And I'm like, "No, I'm running bots and labeling engines and tools that do check speech and like let people either use an AI thing or report to a server. And then there's a team of people that will provide tags and stuff like that. We have that stuff. You don't have to use it. You can block it, you can mute it and everything else. But I still get to say what I want to say about what you're saying.
Yeah. And, you know, I would never stop you from doing that. You know, you want to post an opinion that I fundamentally disagree with. I can say, you know, I think that's stupid. I don't want to see it. I could even block you, but it doesn't take your post off of the network. You know, you still have the right to post wherever you want to post. And I think sometimes when we look at defederation, we have this argument between allowing everything or policing everything. And to some degree, I think leaving that up to individual users is the right choice.
Oh yeah, you already know my personal stance on this, and that's one of the biggest things that I dislike about the Fediverse is uh just the power that it provides admins, right, in the space, and
Not,
the fact,
yeah,
yeah, and the fact that like it's so focused on that and focused on like a consensus outrage to anything that's not like, you know, I guess from a global perspective, you know, like center left and then US left leaning, right? Like there's things that are problematic, and I
Yeah.
believe that we should have these tools where each individual person should be able to define the experiences that they would like to have, right? Like, um, as you said, like you build these bots, you build these tools, and that will make your experience and other people's experiences safer, but it's not eliminating other people saying what they're saying, right? Like, you know, Joe Nazi can still go off and say whatever he wants to say. You just don't have to be privy to it, right? And that's how
yeah,
it
you
works
don't
in the
have to
real
hear
world.
them.
Yeah, we don't have to hear it. Like we're supposed to, like as these devices become more powerful, right? And technology advances, the digital world is more so mirroring the real world, right? And so we also have to take some of the same like affordances and behaviors and apply them, right? Like how are we going to conduct ourselves digitally? And so that's what kind of gets me upset, and I probably, you know, pissed off a couple of people that I've seen coming at you, Rabble, you know, on Noster, because I'm like, it's very predatory, uh, a frame of mind,
Yep.
right? To think that to say that moderation, right, is wrong. Like, no, like you don't get to follow someone down the street and talk in their face. Like that's not okay, right? Like, or you don't get to walk on somebody's property, you know, because like no, like people make associations all the time, right? We determine who we want to speak to, where we want to speak to them, what we want to engage with, and that should also extend online, right? And so that's why I'm happy what you're doing. I remember we wouldn't even like touch Nasser. I remember like within the first 5 seconds, I'm seeing, you know, N bombs and F bombs and not and the swear words, you know, the
You
slurs. And so I'm like,
you
man,
won't see it using
and I
the NOS
couldn't.
app though.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, that was the great thing about it. And so like it was your app, and I couldn't find any other app at the time that would allow me to take some curation steps. And then I think it was Iris was like outside of NOS that I was like, oh, there's keyword filters. And so once I was able to do that, I'm like, oh, there's actually humans on here, like people talking about
Yeah.
stuff outside of like slurs and bitcoins. And so, I was able to actually use it and been able to, we've had a heavier presence on it. But it's like, man, like why we have these big, beautiful, evolved brains.
Yep.
Like, why do we need to use quote unquote free speech to do like moronic things? Like, we should be inventing and building upon and advancing science and mathematics and curing, and like there's so much that we could be doing rather than worrying about someone's race, religion, sexual orientation, like all of these kind of things that aren't really productive to society.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Damon, you made a point earlier about, your headache with the Fediverse and moderation. And I think one advantage that Nostr absolutely has, and it's something that the Fediverse should absolutely steal, our own version of the Farcaster Frames thing, is that Nostr's identity system is really, really good. Um, the Fediverse heavily tethers user identities to individual servers.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, unless you're using a specific kind of server, like Hubzilla is a good example where it's all this like really crazy experimental stuff. By this point, it's ancient technology, but you know, you can't easily decouple your identity from a server and easily take everything with you somewhere else. And so if your server goes down, or if you're banned, or if, the community decides, fuck this guy, we're going to nuke him, you don't have the ability to take anything with you. Like, you have to start over from scratch. And Noster's architecture of just, here's my identity, it's this hashed thing, and it just freely floats in the network untethered to anything, I think is one of its best and strongest concepts when it comes to avoiding being deplatformed
It
or
doesn't
censored
have
by
to freely
anybody.
float. Like, you control your identity and you put your content on multiple servers. But if you go at Rabble at Nos.Social and put that
Yeah,
into Mastodon.social, it will find me. Like my Noster name is also an entirely valid Fediverse name with Webfinger and everything else. Like, so,
yeah,
but the like users in the Fediverse, like, they have to choose so many things. They have to choose a community, they have to choose a trust and safety system, they have to choose an identity, they have to choose a visual design, and you can have mobile apps that use like the Mastodon API. You're choosing all of these things bundled together
yeah,
when on some fundamental level they shouldn't be so bundled. Like, I
yeah,
should be able to take my Rabble at Mastodon.social and use it in a different server without having to be like, I'm no longer Rabble at Mastodon.social. I'm now this other person. Please, I'm migrating all of my follows. Please migrate your like, it's a mess.
yeah. It's rough.
That's
And
one
I
of the things
think,
about
like,
changing usernames. It's really frustrating.
yeah, well, I think Blue Sky's use of did PLC and Noster's use of, keys as identity, while I think there are some edge case issues with both of those things, I think they're way superior for using that to declare user identity rather than at user at handle. And at user dot at handle is great for discovery, it's great for mentioning, it's great for interactions. But I really prefer the way NIPO5 does it, where it's just like, hey, I just have this on a server and it's verified, and the account and the server point at each other, and yeah, it looks like a web finger handle, but it's not. It's not hard coded, and I can change it at any
Or you could
time.
have multiple that go back to the thing. And that's the irony of what Blaine did when he created Webfinger. Like,
Yeah,
like, like it was supposed to support multiple. It
yeah,
wasn't supposed to just be, this is your Fediverse address. It was supposed to be, here's how you find all the different accounts of information about me and different things. And it's
yeah,
great that Mastodon uses it and that the Fediverse requires on it, but like the we're using so little of Webfinger.
yeah. It's funny because it's ubiquitous, but at the same time, like, it's really used for only one or two things. I think, like, the intention behind it was much more thorough in what could be discovered, and for the most part, we just use it as sort of a redirect towards other pieces of data.
Yeah.
So, well, Rebel, we're coming up at almost an hour and 30 minutes in our recording session, and granted, like, you have been a fountain of information, and it is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to talk to you. Like, I love picking your brain about all these different subjects, but at some point, we do kind of have to hit a closing point,
Yeah,
just for the sake of brevity. I just wanted to ask really quick, like, you've been building NOS, and that's been its own experience for you. And I think pivoting from Planetary was probably a big
it
deal
was a
for
huge
you and
deal.
your team. Um, I was wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit towards that experience of creating NOS and maybe what your vision is for making Nostr a better place through what you're offering.
Absolutely. So when we decided to pivot and switch protocols from Secure Scuttlebutt to Nostr, we did a pretty intentional evaluation of that decision.
Yeah.
We did a technical document where we analyzed the technology behind it. You can still see it's online. We published it. And it's a
Yep.
really neat comparison of Nostr and Scuttlebutt. And we also did a social evaluation of it. Who are the users? What are the dynamics? What are the pluses, minuses? Who's building it? All these kind of things. And our conclusion was that Nostr solved most of the big fundamental tech problems that we had with Secure Scuttlebutt. But that the Nostr community was very different than the Scuttlebutt community, and there were already some right wing trolls and people who are like, you know, free speech overall. I need free speech to harass people and say offensive things on Nostr. And so our feeling was, can we build on top of Nostr a space by which many communities could exist and not just one? And the communities are given the tools to define their own spaces. And we looked at Eleanor Ostrom's work on governing the commons. And we said, the Fediverse, Nostr, Blue Sky, all of these, the internet itself, all of it should be considered a digital commons. And a digital commons isn't one thing, it's this nested set of things. And so what we're building on top of Nostr is the ability to have a governable commons, the ability to set boundaries and rules and observe other people's behavior and have sanction when it is and know what the rules are, which is like one of the Fediverse problems is like they even violated rules they didn't know existed. And provide sanction for that in a graduated way and be able to kick out people from communities within subsets of the network, and the legality from the state or whatever larger entities you need to exist. And so what we're doing is we're saying, how do we build these things on top of Nostr? How do we build the tools for people to have different communities of spaces? And so we're running this journalism and creator accelerator where we're bringing in non-Bitcoin people and we're saying, here is a space and we're going to focus on different communities. And the real question is, can we make it so that these communities in social protocols can exist in parallel? And in the Fediverse, it sort of worked because you can have Gab and like all of Alex Gleason's weird ass shit. And you don't see it on Mastodon Social because there's ways of blocking individuals or defederating servers. But it's not transparent and it's not very graduated in the sanctions. And so we need new things, and we need to build these
Yes.
things that let us govern a space by which we can have all these communities that set their own rules. And we need to be able to enforce those rules using this decentralized network, which is a combination of code and servers and data, and build that. And so what we're trying to do is build that, because I deeply believe that we need social media protocols. We need social media space to allow us to engage in further social change. And this goes all the way back to working on protest.net and indie media 25 years ago now. Been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
Through Odeo to help bring about podcasting, through Twitter, through a whole bunch of other projects. What we're doing, to quote Subcomandante Marcos, is creating a media revolution to make revolution possible. And so
Yes.
we are creating the space by which social movements and social change can happen. And I firmly believe that if that space is owned by a corporation. It doesn't matter how well-meaning that corporation is, because Twitter was really well-meaning and really mission-driven. Eventually, the dynamics of the market and ownership take over and will derail us.
Yeah.
And so they will refocus things into algorithms and space. And so, to me, Nostr itself isn't the answer. This larger
No.
community of people building an open alternative is the answer. But Nostr is the easiest place to quickly experiment and build things and push things forward. It's got the right balance of stuff. And maybe it'll fail, maybe it won't be perfect, but we're trying to build the space by which people can rule their own public spaces, as opposed to asking for Meta's trust and safety team to keep us safe.
Yeah.
And we know
No, that's a
that sometimes they'll keep people safe, and a lot of people there care deeply. But they also destroyed the media industry by lying about all the viewer numbers. They brought all of these nonprofits in to make Facebook pages and do the donations through them, and then just cut them off. Like, you can't trust someone else to own your essential means of reproduction.
They're not reliable stewards. At the end of the day, they have a profit margin and they're directed by their own interests. And we've definitely seen a lot of mass scale fuck ups with Meta, as far as like you look at
Now we're
the
trusting
Rohingya.
It's like,
Yeah, well, the Rohingya genocide, I think, is a good example, and it gets pulled up a lot as examples as to like why people don't want anything to do with Threads. But it is a legitimate example of just fucking up on moderation in general. And I think at scale, as a company that is that size with that amount of resources thrown into it, you kind of actually ironically get sort of a lessened level of accountability, because you're just managing so much. And granted, they probably filtered out all kinds of horrible crap, but at the same time, you're a big centralized entity that has an army of people subjecting themselves to the worst of the worst every single day. And that's not a sustainable way to do moderation of the internet.
and the people doing that trust and safety work at Meta, but also they care a lot. They are working hard. But I talked to one of the Meta trust and safety people whose job was to track the alt-right and the Boogaloo Boys and all these other people, Proud Boys and everything. She knew exactly who they were. She knew exactly what they were doing. And she said report after report after report to get these people deplatformed off the Facebook platforms, and it got killed up the management hierarchy.
Yeah.
It isn't that the people doing the work aren't amazing and really well-meaning. And like, if you look at Threads controls about replies and interactions and who can do what, and it's great.
Yeah.
Like, it's way more sophisticated than anything else we have. But it's
But
on
at
a
the same time,
platform that's gonna algorithmically push other stuff, and it doesn't matter
no
how
politics.
wonderful those engineers and product people are if they're gonna get, overruled.
I mean, if their policy is not to talk about politics and not promote political content and not promote news, which I get it, but at the same time, those are foundational pieces of everyday life. You're going to have a network where none of those things get reported and you just get crap.
Well, we got to be fair. So they do allow the conversation to happen, right?
Sure.
Yeah,
They're
they
just
do.
not amplifying it, right? Like they're just not amplifying it. So I've heard people say that, right? Like I want to make sure we push the information out there correctly.
No,
Like so
fair.
people can have those conversations about politics, right? And they do. Like that's mostly my feed when I'm on Threads, right? Like whether it be MSNBC and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. It's a really great experience, and so I think people took it and went the wrong way just because they said, "Hey, we're not going to amplify it." They're not saying, "Oh, we're going to censorship, we're going to block it," anything of that nature. It's on there. It's on my feed whenever I go on there. The 3 minutes that I average per day probably on there, but still, right? Like it's Meta doesn't deserve a pass, right? Like there's a lot that they got wrong, and I get why the people have the opinions that they do have, right? But at the same time, similar to what we were discussing earlier about Twitter, it's about the users, right? It's about the culture, it's about the people, and they're the ones going to drive these buses, right? Like, and so just how Twitter, the bus was driven by the people, that's what's happening with Threads, right? Meta is saying, hey, no, 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 we don't want to amplify discussions about politics. Guess what's happening? You know, every day, all day, the conversation is like 99% politics, right? Like it's gonna go where the people are gonna go, and there's not much Meta could do about it.
Right.
The whenever I think about the protocols and the larger work we're doing, I remember the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, which designed most of the protocols we use, the core protocols of the internet.
Yep.
And they have a statement which was, we reject voting, democracy, and kings and presidents. We believe in rough consensus and running code. And
Mm.
I think that is a really good way. Like, that gave us the internet we have today, and we need to stop looking for heroes. Like, the fear is that Jack is providing undue influence over these protocols with putting money in and support everything else. The truth of the matter is, on some, like, yeah, he messed up, but on some level, what he's actually doing is building a system that doesn't put him in charge. And, like, I think that that's part of why so many of the early Twitter people are involved in all these projects, is because we had a system where we weren't in charge. Like, we were in charge, but we weren't in charge. And we pretended like we
Yeah.
weren't in charge, and we had this cultivated thing. And then all of a sudden, we're like, oh shit, we built a system where we are in charge. And now that's messed up. And so,
Yeah.
like, we need to not reproduce a system where there is a person in charge. Like, I don't want to be dependent on Jay Graber's decisions. She is a wonderful person who is doing an amazing job, but I don't want to be stuck in case she changes her mind or she gets replaced by the Blue Sky board and someone else comes in. I don't want to be dependent on what Adam Mosseri says. I don't want to be dependent on what Jack Dorsey says or Fiat Joff or Yugen. Like the whole point of this is, let's not pick a new hero to save us.
I think that's also a very interesting case study when you look at Twitter, when you look at the mechanisms that it developed for deplatforming and how they ostensibly were trying to make good decisions about, hey, we're a global public square, so to speak. We're trying to figure out, hey, there's this hate speech, it's affecting a lot of people. Like, they tried their best. But when Elon came in and took over, those mechanisms were inverted to support his politics rather than the politics of the people that had it before. And I think the key message to take away from that is, regardless of who the gatekeeper is, you don't want those mechanisms to affect people's ability to speak.
And
Yeah,
Like,
that's actually
yeah,
perfect to put it that way. And to Jack's credit, right? Like he's openly admitted several times that he's messed up, right? He made mistakes. He's human, like all of us are, right? Like so, I think that that's the beautiful part is being able to acknowledge those, right? Like there's some people like Mr. Musk, like other people that don't really have those humane aspects, right? They're not saying, "Oh, I was wrong," right? Like I think to me that shows a very uh, uh, self-aware person and takes a lot of humility to admit that and then also try to be a part of the solution, which is what Jack has been doing, right? Is which is also what Rabble is doing, and many of the ex Twitter folks are being part of the solution to be able to uh, foster these conversations and these platforms. That way, no one is the boss, and we all have a voice. And I think that's key, and that's a beautiful way to put it in terms of not looking for heroes. And that actually triggered a thought in my head. I think that's a big problem what I have with the Fediverse because there is this like damsel in distress syndrome, like needing a protector, and that's how they treat the admins, right? Like and versus my clashes is I'm like, hey, I'm an individual. I make everyday decisions for myself, for my family, and I should be able to do that like online, just like anybody else. And why do we need an admin to save us from the boogeyman? Like and so
it's
I do.
also incredibly infantilizing from the perspective of user agency. Um, having someone make all of your decisions for you and there's no way for you to appeal that is not a good experience. And I think sometimes our trust and safety efforts, despite their good intentions, from the moderator perspective, creates a power structure of its own. And that can affect people's abilities to maintain relationships across the network when two of their admins are infighting and being petty with each other. Or, it's just it's not a good experience. It affects people's abilities to freely associate on their own terms.
Absolutely. And we're really good at interpersonal human dynamics. Like
Sure.
like that's why we fight over it too. But like, let's build our tools that make those things easier to work on. Let's build tools that let us solve this, and let's not be afraid of the big bad world out there on the internet saying we can't handle it. Maybe, private spaces are wonderful, but like, let's build tools that let our govern ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
and we can do it, and we've seen it work. And the my favorite social media app is Front Porch, and
Never heard of it.
it is only in Vermont and upstate New York,
Okay.
and it is very local. And I think they have like 15% of the population uses it. It's incredibly popular.
Weird.
And every post goes through community moderators, and every community is separate in its own space. So you get your own little Vermont town, and
Hmm.
all posts have to be pre-moderated approval, and that's the way everyone agrees to it. There's no
Hmm.
reply, and there's a 24-hour locked-in delay between when you send it in and when people see it.
Oh my god.
And so they've chosen to build all these constraints in the system, and chosen the exact opposite of Silicon Valley scaling. And
Yeah.
it is the healthiest, most wholesome. Like, it's the opposite of Nextdoor. Imagine if Nextdoor
Yeah.
were like Vermont utopian.
Huh.
And isn't
That's
everybody going to all our
mind-blowing.
problems? No, but like, they figured it out.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
amazing because
wild.
you look at Nextdoor, and Nextdoor is this just cesspool of like
It's awful.
people saying horrible shit and
Yeah.
doing horrible
I
shit.
refuse to I refuse to use it because I don't need new reasons to hate my neighbors.
But Front Porch does the same thing. It lets you connect to your neighbors in a local community and understand stuff. And they've got different sets of rules and different sets of dynamics. And to me, it shows us that with the right sets of rules and dynamics and technology and choosing it and engaging, we can be really healthy. It's like if read the late David Graeber and his last
Mhm.
book, it's like, we don't have to look at the civilizations that built giant temples and had poor people. We can
Yep.
look at the civilizations that where they had millions of people and everybody lived in the same kinds of houses. And there was no distinct hierarchy. In modern day
Yeah.
Ukraine, the burnt culture lasted for a couple thousand years. And by all indications, it was an entirely egalitarian society that existed for like 3,000 years. And
Huh.
we never think about that. We think about the Egyptians and their pyramids, and we think about, the Romans, and we think about the Greeks, and we think about all of these like incredibly hierarchical societies. And we don't think about the societies that were the opposite. And so Front Porch is that opposite. It's the anti Nextdoor. And so we can do that. And some of the Fediverse servers are great in that way,
Yeah.
but they're they feel embattled, and they feel attacked, and they like lash out, and it feels like HOA problems, and and you know that's not the right way to defend the space.
Well, and some of them have been through real hell too. I think Ro on Mastodon, or I think he's on Miski now,
Yeah.
but he ran a Mastodon server dedicated to the Black community. And unfortunately, because racism in the Fediverse is largely unchecked, like people can block it, but it doesn't stop it from happening. It turned out that him and a small group of volunteers had to basically defend the space 24/7. And that's
Miserable.
exhausting. It's horrible, and it's just not a good experience. Like, they tried their best, and to their credit, they ran a really good service for a really long time, but the kind of fatigue you get from having to do that to protect your space so that it's not just treated like a dumping ground for the worst of the worst, there has to be a better way.
Yep.
I think even within the corporate world with Meta's army of moderators, a lot of times they contract that out to third parties, and those contractors work under the worst conditions possible.
Sure.
They're looking at some of the goriest, most horrific videos that you could imagine, and a lot of them develop psychological issues over time because the fatigue of dealing with it is just too much. Eh, a lot of moderators in the Fediverse take on similar burdens by having to deal with that constantly.
Yeah, and it's hard, and it's rough, and I think we need to build both technological and social solutions to these problems. Like, it's not one or the other.
No, it's both. You can't just out technology a social problem. You can make it better in a number of ways, but you have to change it on a social level.
Yep.
Well, Evan, it has been absolutely delightful talking to you. We're going to wrap up this episode. I just wanted to say, do you have any parting thoughts or words to give to our audience of listeners?
My parting words is we are all part of Team Open. Like, we win together, and we should be learning about stuff between these different platforms rather than creating this fight between Blue Sky and Noster and Mastodon and all these others. Like we're building a commons together, and all of these parts
Yes.
are part of it. And the real thing is, are we going to end up in a world again controlled by a single giant corporation? Or are we going to end up a world where we control it? And can we figure out how to do that? And
Yeah.
remember who the real enemy is.
Who is the real enemy?
I mean, the real enemy is a world in which we are passive consumers, where we have no say,
Yes.
where our content, our social space, our public space is expropriated for AI, for advertising. You look at Instagram, the ads are really good because they know all sorts of things about it. They know so much about us, we think that our phones are listening to us. And
Yes.
that is dystopian. But all of the social media space, the Fediverse and everything else is a utopian alternative. And we have examples of that working. In Wikipedia, it works. They are a bottom-up participatory driven. In Debian, it works. But not just in the technology space. I'm sober in recovery. Alcoholics Anonymous and the other 12-step programs is the largest decentralized anarchist organization in the world.
Weird.
Like, every group is autonomous and self-running, and you rotate all the positions and is self-funded and has no public spokespersons and has no hierarchy of organizations. Like,
I didn't know that.
I'm an adult child of alcoholics, and we go to these meetings, and like, I'm outing myself, but we're going to change the name. And it was like a multi-year democratic process that was incredibly participatory and involved the whole world and like hundreds of thousands of people. And like, people mostly think of AA as that meeting where you say, hi, I'm Evan, I'm an alcoholic. But we have models on how we can coordinate massive levels of human interaction in a bottom-up way that is voluntary and has rotating jobs and is self-funded. Let's learn from those models.
Thank you so much, Rabble. It's been wonderful to have you. You can find Rabble at Nos.Social. He's very knowledgeable and has been working on the decentralized peer-to-peer space for a long time. You can also find us at hello@social.wedistribute.org on the Fediverse, news@wedistribute.org on Noster. And you can also support us on our Open Collective at opencollective.com/WeDistribute and patreon.com/WeDistribute. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been the best.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.